For anybody who's watched any of my content, you know that I am not the political guy. I'm not going to go on political rants. I'm not going to go into the, us versus them thing. I'm not doing the lefty thing, the righty thing. Though I have my own beliefs and my own stances about, much of life, I still don't view life from a lens of politics. Because first and foremost, I recognize that it is divisive and it is something that is used as a mechanism to separate us. And I believe that we do ourselves a disservice when we buy into that. So here is a little bit about my own story. I'm going to give you guys a SparkNote version. I don't know if they still have SparkNotes. It's basically where you used to go if you were in school. You used to have like a book report and you didn't want to read the book. So you just went to SparkNotes and they would give you the summaries, right? So I'm going to give you that version. So born and raised in Africa from the age of 5, from the age of 1 to the age of, age of 0 to the age of 5 was in Zimbabwe, age of 5 to the age of 10, South Africa, right? Moved to the States, moved to Texas for 3 months with my pop side of the family until we were planted over here on the West Coast, West, y'all, Californiazo in the Bay Area, where I spent the next 17 or so years of my life. In the Bay Area, you can only imagine the type of conditioning that I had growing up in such a place, right? It is no surprise that California is the bluest state. I mean, it's, about as blue as Crips. Like, this place is the epitome of the liberal party or the Democratic Party, right? And so obviously I fell right into that. I fell right into the belief systems, the ideologies of the left. And I was okay with that because it got me the validation and the acceptance and the approval of everybody who was around me. And so, it was working out for me. Though I've always been this kind of, questioner of reality and what is truth and what is not, etc. I still was leaning left because my environment was leaning left and I was a people pleaser more than anything. So I just wanted to be liked. It was just easier for me to live that way. It was easier for me not to get into arguments with my cousins and with, my older brother and just about everybody else in my environment who had those same ideological beliefs. So it was around 2015, 2016 when that started to shift a little bit. Ironically, when there was this onslaught, huge attack upon the name of Trump, right? And again, people gonna freak out. You can just say a name and it would trigger folks. Like, it's incredible how easily we have become offendable. Like, we have become just, ready for offense about anything. Can't even have a discussion. It's incredible. But anyway, when they were having this, this Trump, who was at the time? It was Trump and Hillary. That campaign showed me a lot just about how given over I was to something simply because of what everybody else around me believed, right? I was having quite of an existential crisis in a lot of different ways. I was seeking identity, but I was also starting to question the world around me. And I was really becoming sick and tired of a lot of things. Like 2015, I was no longer an addict. So from 14 to around 19, I've been an addict. And I left that lifestyle, completely left everybody who I knew in that lifestyle. And so I was seeking identity. And I still, lefty, and I got into Pan-Africanism. And, I was doing the whole, I'm black, y'all, I'm black, y'all, I'm blackity black because I'm black, y'all. Like, that was just, that was my motion. That's how I was moving through life. So again, it was around 2016 when Trump and Hillary were going back and forth, when I realized how hard the media was going at this dude. And I knew something even back then. I understood that the traditional media, because I'd stopped watching the news and even having like a TV, like just, a TV in my house or room, etc., for years at that point. Because I had an understanding that that level of programming was programming. It was conditioning me to think in a certain way. And so when I saw this attack on this dude who I knew very little about besides, his past, and I knew that rappers loved him and loved talking about him, etc., and, owned some hotels, whatever. When I saw the absolute sheer hatred towards this individual, something in me was like, there has to be something deeper. Because every time the media tells you something is bad and it's terrible and it's wrong, it's oftentimes the opposite. Like, when they're going savage against one entity, it's usually because that entity is a threat, right? And what is a threat to the traditional systems, the oligarchs or whatever it may be, is probably something that is best for the people. So I started looking into it. I started, instead of going on Twitter to look up, sound bites or little, 140 character situations, I started doing deep dives. I started looking up full blown debates and interviews, and I started really going in. I started truly going in for myself. And what happened was, over time, I started actually, God forbid, thinking for myself and coming up to conclusions for myself. And I started recognizing how the things I was being told didn't necessarily match the reality of what was actually going on. And because I was in this generation that, was not exactly wired to do research, but instead just take a headline and run with it, instead be emotionalized and radicalized and run with that narrative, because I was in that generation, it's like I seem like this kind of lone wolf. I seem like an outcast when I started to voice my questions. It was that simple. I wasn't even going crazy because I wasn't like, oh, now I'm a writing. I was just asking questions. I was asking, is it possible that this maybe not the case? Is it possible that, it's not that they're evil, they're good? And I was already getting backlash at that point. And during that 2016, 2017, like there was so much going on, so many movements, and you know what I mean? Like this activism and that activism, and social media was now this monster, this gigantic beast of a thing where everybody was galvanizing behind their mantra and their movement and what they stood for and what they stood against. And it seemed like, we had become so divisive and we had bought into all the hatred on every side of the aisle. And I'll be honest, like at that time, I was still very much looking for an identity to attach to. So the more I started getting backlash on one side, like the more I started experiencing, individuals getting at me, people who are close to me, maybe, family members, younger family members who have been radicalized and things of that nature, and who have bought into the narrative of like everything is caused by racism. We started getting into conflict because I had a story that was different than what I was being told. They had a story that was different, but they were still looking to attach themselves to this movement. They were still looking to find identity in this movement where they would find acceptance, or thought and believed that there was true acceptance, right? It's like we called ourselves free thinkers when we were on the far left, yet if you thought any different, now you're an outcast. And I even remember, because at the time, I was still, doing the little religion thing. I was still doing the little church thing. And so I remember having some of my friends, more specifically some white friends, calling me after the George Floyd incident. And like 3 of them called me in one night, and they were like, what do I do? Like this person, that person, who they were. These are people I used to see together all the time. These were besties, like type of individuals, people they claim to love, right? And these were religious folks on top of that. And the thing that kept on popping up was like, this person doesn't want to talk to me. I can't even bring up any questions. Like, can I talk to you? And the reason they were coming to me is because they knew I was somebody willing to have a conversation. That's just my nature. I don't know if it's the Aquarian nature, I don't know what it is that just made me a guy who was at least at some point willing to question the narrative. And so, I had the conversations with them. It's like, let's talk this through. And, and for me, again, I was in a place where I was simply questioning everything. For the first time, I was allowing myself to think for myself. And so I wasn't going with the narrative that was being talked about on the left or the right side. I would bring things back to a human aspect of just the humanity of things. And it's crazy how even up till this point, like that's where I stand with everything, is like the human race. It's amazing how there's been so much backlash and so much animosity towards me claiming my humanness as opposed to my blackness, right? It's like if you reject, it's not even a rejection really, but if you do not pedestalize your blackness above all things, then you are self-hating. Then you're somebody who is, a pawn of white supremacy and all these sorts of messages. And it's so interesting for me because it's like if I'm doing the opposite, if I'm, radicalized in my blackness and everything is about my blackness, etc., it's like I'm seen almost as a messiah. I'm seen as this person who is for the cause and for the culture. Yet what I'm truly doing is actually adding to the problem. because I'm saying this is all about race. I'm making things about race more so. It's like I'm saying they're making it about race. So what I'm going to do to solve it is make it about race. And it's like that doesn't make just common sense to me, you know? And I know these are tough, touchy subjects, but I'm also in a place where I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to, I'm just not going to be in a place where I'm going to, sit back and tell a lie just to make people comfortable. I'm not responsible for people's emotions. They're not responsible for my emotions. I completely accept that. I'm double on they're not responsible for my own emotions. And so I have an understanding within myself that, if I articulate something, somebody disagrees, that is simply their opinion. I don't take it home with me. I don't settle it down. I don't keep it with me because I know that that has nothing to do with me. But, I do believe that there is a necessity to finally start having a dialogue of just, what about bringing things simply back to our humanity? Is there space for us to just make it a conversation about how do we actually move forward instead of regressing backwards? Can even a small collective of us, have the desire or the ambition or the vision to have a world in which we are actually incorporated, in which we can actually move in unison and not make things so surface level? It's basically like saying, well, that person was doing these terrible things, so now I'm going to be the person who does those terrible things. I wish the same upon them that, they once wished upon me. That doesn't work at a practical sense. Like for me, I'm a practicalist. Like it's not even a virtuous or morality thing. It's just simply that doesn't work. When Einstein, we view him as some sort of genius. He says the mind that creates the problem cannot also create the solution. There's a deep understanding in that of you can't focus on, you can't focus on an issue and then fix the issue through the focus energetically of the issue. This is getting into universal law, right? You must be focused on solution in order to get to solution. So instead of anti something, you must be pro something. Pro peace movements worked because they were fixated and focused upon peace. But when you have anti something, you're actually creating more contention. You're creating more division. And truth be told, if I was like a dictator or some kind of, overlord of a nation, I would simply make two opposites and have them fight each other. And then I'll just leave it at that. I would make everything about, external identity instead of the identity that you truly are, which is this beautiful, magnificent, specimen that is human. Instead of that, I'll make it about, oh, black, white, oh, black, red. That I would just keep it so surface level that it keeps you in this adolescent state forever, even in this infantile state, to where you never actually grow and mature and realize that we are really all one. And this ain't even a message is kumbaya, kumbaya. Like it's not a kumbaya message. It's just saying at a practical level, when we allow ourselves to be controlled and manipulated by any sort of machine that we allow to think for us and feel for us, like think about the identity you're given. You were born into an identity, which means somebody created it for you. And then you identified, you internalized it, and you said, that's what I am and that's who I am. And then you started acting it out. It acts as a parasite to the host. And so you say, this is what it is to be black. This is what it is to be white. This is what it is to be, Asian. This is what it is to be Hispanic. This is what it is to be whatever. And so you start to live out those life experiences. You manifest certain experiences for yourself and you perpetuate the very same traumas time and time again, instead of breaking those storylines and saying, no, I'm not going to accept the label that you give me. If somebody came up to you right now and said you're an idiot, would you just take the label because they said it? What if they said it 5 times, 10 times, 150, 150 times? Like, would you then take it? No, you would reject it. Yet we take these labels and we take the disempowerment that actually comes with them and we internalize them and then we project them outwardly and then we move through life in that way. That's a part of conditioning, y'all. We were given these identities. We were told that you're this thing. And therefore that means this about you. And therefore it means you can only do that, or you can't do this, or you can only move in a certain way, or you can only have certain things. Like you look at me right now, I got a do-rag on and I got this wife beater, right? So you have a perception of what I'm going to sound like. You have a perception of how I'm going to move. And if it contradicts what you think, it's like it breaks the circuitry in your head. That's conditioning. That is conditioning. You are conditioned to believe certain things. And the more you buy into that conditioning, the more you buy into that propaganda, that programming that has been instilled and repeated and you've internalized and taken ownership of, the more you buy into that, the more you find yourself at a deficit, the more you find yourself in that space of suffering, in that space of self-imposed victimhood. You know, we're like, we become allergic to responsibility. We become allergic to accountability, and we view it as almost this altruistic or positive thing to, you know, to blame as many people as possible, to have as many people be responsible for our own lives as possible. And it really is unfortunate because when we don't think for ourselves, there will always be somebody who's willing to think for us. There will always be somebody who is willing to take that responsibility, to take that job upon themselves to think for you. If I had a sinister mind and, you know, I was scarcity driven, I was, you know, rooted in my ego, and I knew what I knew, I would make sure that you stayed as entrenched in this mentality of us versus them as possible. I would make you the greatest victim. I would have you buy into the, you know, quote unquote fact that you are the most oppressed of all, that, you know, that all these things are happening to you, that you have no control and no autonomy over your life, that, you know, life is just happening to you. That's the narrative I would sell you if I wanted to control you. And when we look around us, that's the narrative that is being sold. That is the crock that is being sold to us. And when we buy into it, we suffer. We don't move forward. When we're pointing the finger outward, we learned this as a baby, right? As a kid. When I point to you, like 3 fingers are pointing back to me, 1 finger is pointing upward. Now, they don't say that, but they say when you point that way, there's still 3 fingers pointing your way. And that's childlike and it's naive and it's whatever, but there is a sense of truth in that. It's like every time I'm pointing outward, I'm always going to be the one who suffers anyway. It just comes and ricochets back on me. It's not a blame game. It's not about blaming ourselves or others. It's about accepting that we actually have power, and we have more power than we know. And this may be a message when you hear it right now, it's triggering as hell because it goes against everything that they've downloaded into your psyche. You know, it's kind of like the Matrix when they had Neo sitting there and they just plugged his head in and they just had all this information and data. It's like he didn't know, you know, he didn't know how to kick a open door open. You know, how do you know how to kick an open door open? Just needs a baby tap. But by the end of that programming, he was able to do all kinds of. He was able to dodge a bullet, y'all. He was able to dodge a damn bullet. He was able to do the. Yeah, I mean, he was able to do the Trump. He was able to cut. That's crazy. We will live our entire lives based upon something that somebody else downloaded, and then we will claim it as our own, and then we will spend the rest of our lives defending that thing instead of living a life of actual freedom. And that's what's on the other side, y'all. Like, you know, the ones who created these movements for us to move forward, it was about forward progression. It wasn't about regression. It wasn't about taking us back into we can't do for self. We talk about MLK, we talk about Malcolm, etc. They might have had whatever ideologies they had, but one thing they had in common was that they wanted to move forward. How do we progress? How do we take a sense of power in this? Not how do we give all our power away by blaming everybody and, you know, and making ourselves to be the greatest victim and making everybody else a villain in our lives. It was not about that. It was about how do we take ownership of our lives? What can we do? You know, it's like, what is the true power that you have? It is your power to choose how you think and to choose how you feel, to not have somebody else think for you, to not be controlled by a narrative of somebody else, to not be pulled and swayed by this far, far left or the far, far right, to not buy into the propaganda machine that has been created with one agenda and one purpose, and that is to make you believe what it wants so you can go out and act out in ways that it wants you to act. It wants you to buy Coca-Cola. It wants you to buy, you know, all kinds of carbohydrates and sugars. It wants you to buy, you know, Louis and Gucci and spend an entire paycheck on a damn belt. It wants you to do what it wants you to do in order to serve its purpose, like an entity of its own. And you have control of whether or not you attach yourself to it. And so that's really my message. It's like, you know, it's not just this kumbaya, can we all get along type of thing. It's to really just say, like, if you just identify as a human, as an individual, as your own person, how terrifying is that? How terrifying is it to not have the approval of everybody around you, to not be liked by them? Because again, for me, there was almost a beauty of it. It's like I got to realize that, oh, if I just disagree with you, then you're going to hate me. You just don't want to hear what I have to say because I disagree. I used to believe that, like, oh, the people around me are so open-minded and, they really care to have dialogue. No, they care to have dialogue about the thing they believe. And that's for most people. I'm not just going to pin that on that political movement, but I'm going to pin it on all of us. Like, we will oftentimes come into a discussion and it's like, I want to have this discussion so long as you agree with me. If you don't agree with me, like, you're my enemy now. And it doesn't have to be that. But again, that's not the software. That's not the programming isn't that, Facebook doesn't like that message because that doesn't get as many clicks as, quote unquote doesn't. That's the story. It's like, that's not going to get as many clicks as that. News knows if it continuously pumps this fear into you and then gets you addicted to the fear cycles, then you're always going to be seeking fear. You're always going to be looking to satisfy and satiate that addiction that you have now created for yourself. Because I'm still not going to put it on them. Because it takes two to tango, you see. I have to be the one enmeshed and entangled in that. And only I can make the decision to step out of that. And it's sometimes it's terrifying at first because you feel like you're isolated. You feel like a loner. You feel like, you feel like everybody hates you or whatever. I remember getting comments from like family members. I remember being in a group of, some of my friends, like a specific group of friends. And like a cousin of mine was like, oh, all white people. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you live in Texas and your church is like 99% Caucasian and you're over here talking about, oh, white people. Like, and on a public platform, aren't you embarrassed? Like, what is that about? Like, it was like a cool little Christmas picture. Everybody's chilling, like, and, oh, white people. It's like, what? Really? Are we still there? Are we still there? Like, are we still at the infantile stages of humanity where that's what matters? Because if we are, and that's genuinely where we are, then we got a long way to go, folks. We got a long, long way to go. Like, we're still focused on what? It's not like, oh, did you enjoy yourself? Oh, what are you guys doing? Oh, what is it up to? Can I come? No, it's, oh, all white people? Imagine if somebody did that, to a post where a white dude's with a bunch of brothers and they say, oh, all black people? Imagine that, like the type of backlash, the type of gobsmackity that would come under a comment like that. But nah, you didn't get nothing. Nobody said anything because, you got the protection of the complexion right now. That's all there is to it. And for me, I don't think that's right or wrong. It's unfortunate for all of us because nobody benefits from that. We think we're benefiting. We think we're winning when, people feel guilty in our presence or people feel shame or whatever. But nobody wins when there's shame because it's shame there. There's no healing that's taking place on either side. We are staying enabled in a place where we're basically, perpetually in a state of learned helplessness. And then the others are staying in a perpetual state of guilt and shame. And so nobody is actually growing. Nobody's actually helped and nobody's actually moving forward and progressing. Somebody can give you all the money, all the reparations of the world right now. It wouldn't mean anything because you don't believe you're worthy of that in the first place. You won't even be able to keep it. That's a story for a whole nother. That's a conversation for a whole nother time. You won't, it's like somebody in the lottery or somebody, making it big somehow in some form of entertainment. If they don't have a consciousness of prosperity and they have a scarcity complex, a scarcity mentality, they're going to find themselves right back into the poorhouse. And then they're going to blame, the system for it again. And it's like, no, we need to let go of that talk. We need to grow up. And I'm talking myself as well. Every time I step into a place of woe is me, somebody did something to me, they're doing this to me, they're the problem for this, I have to really look at myself and say, what's this about? Like, why are you making them the issue? Why can't you look at yourself and see what might be going on here? Because I'm just not willing to accept the lie anymore. I'm not willing to accept the lie that I have no autonomy, I have no control, that environment is what makes me and that I can't control environment. Instead, I say, I choose the people I surround myself with. I choose the messaging that I allow into my psyche. I choose whether or not something is going to influence me. I choose whether or not, I do or do not do something. I choose my actions. I choose my thoughts. I choose my emotions. And when I let somebody else do it, then I can't blame them for getting the outcome that they desired from it. Like, again, if you're that easily controllable, if you're somebody who is so triggerable, then everybody's going to trigger you. Like, I would look, if all I cared about was just getting you inflamed, I would make all content about the things that you oppose, and you would stay in my comment section from day to night going in, and I would be getting paid buku money from you. I would be on the Howard Stern type of tip where it's just like 50 to 70% of my fan base is the people who are haters because they can't stand the air that I breathe. I would do that if I didn't care so much for the truth. And frankly, that's a waste of my time. I'm not looking to create agitation in my life. I'm just looking to speak the truth and to let the truth be heard. And the truth is that you have more power than you ever believed. The truth is that you are far more powerful than you ever believed. And that you are not somebody who is a victim to circumstances, is that you are somebody who is an overcomer of all things, and that you don't have to defend yourself and fight things in life. When you focus on the energy of defense, when you focus on the energy of fighting, then you are creating more things in your lifestyle to fight about, or in your manifested reality to have to fight. When you focus somewhere, where your energy flows, that's where your life goes. That's going to be the trajectory of your life. So if I choose peace instead of resentment and bitterness, then I'm going to have a peaceful experience. That's why you don't believe some people when they tell you that they don't face the same things you do. You say that has to be a lie. There's no way. You have to call it privilege. You have to call it, white supremacy. You got to call it black supremacy. You're going to call, you can call it all kinds of stuff, because you can't fathom that somebody who maybe looks like you is not having the experience that you're having, but it's because their energy is not in that place. And that's that's your saving grace. There's not going to be somebody to fall out the sky one day and tell you, hey, like everything's all good. Like, you have to make that decision. Even if they were to fall out the sky, you would still have to make a decision for yourself to be like, okay, sky person, guy who fell out the sky, like, let me do something about this. Let me follow these steps and do something about it. I'm the guy who just fell out the sky right now. And I'm saying, look, you got to do something about this. Otherwise, you're going to continue to suffer. You're going to continue to struggle. And you're going to find yourself radicalized time and time again in just different ideologies. You're going to find yourself hating and making people the villain. You're going to find yourself, suffering every single time, because there is no peace. There is no rest in conflict, like in consistently battling and challenging and problem seeking and problem creation. There's no peace to be had there. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, mind you. I don't like, I used to, lefty cringe, righty uptighties. Like, I used to look at all that type of stuff and just, I can't stand her. I can't stand him. I can't stand, Hassan, Ben Shapiro. Like, these are two people who are having their own experiences. They're choosing to think what they want, and it is dictating the way in which they live their lives. And if that is edifying to them, so be it. But if it's terrorizing and it's keeping them in a state of, perpetual anger, frustration, resentment, bitterness, then they are at a loss. They're at a deficit. And I do not wish that on anybody. That's why I don't do the, spilling tea on other folks' situation. I don't. First of all, I don't care enough. Like, I think one of the most powerful things we can do is just to mind our own business. That's number one. That's a whole takeaway, right? That's a whole bar by itself. But secondly, the reason why I don't get into it is because I understand that it's like I'm only basically making myself out to be a villain. It's like, oh, these people are so terrible and they're making life terrible for me. Like, no. Instead, I can say, what solution am I looking for in my life? How do I become the solution? It's like, if you want more people to experience wealth, do you fight the wealthy or do you create wealth? Right? Find ways to create wealth, or find, create movements around building wealth. Now, I have the answer. It's a pretty rhetorical question, but I've seen this answer play out. I've seen environments shift. Like right now, I live in like a very small town type of area. I lived here for the last year or so. Might be here for a little longer, and then I plan on making, a few moves. But as I'm here, something that I've seen is, the galvanizing around just a cause, and how you can come together and say, okay, like we're going to, change the infrastructure. We're going to make, better housing, better this, better that. And having a focus on that instead of like opposing something is so much more powerful, so infinitely more powerful. Instead of, eat the rich, it's become the rich. How about that? If you think all the rich are so evil, then, and you think you're a good person, then you become a good rich person. But no, because that's not what it's about. It's simply about an ideology. It's about protecting and preserving. Really, the baseline is like one's own fears, one's own deepest insecurities and feelings of inadequacy and not enoughness, and finding purpose in, in something external. That's what that's actually about. So even if you did eat all the rich, or all the rich, gave all their money away, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to satisfy. You're just going to find a new enemy to create. And until there is no enemy within, there will be no enemy without. Like, you'll forever be fighting this enemy without. Until you get rid of that animosity within yourself, you're always going to find something. That's what, I saw for myself. When I went left, and then I went right, all of it was nothing more than me first looking again to find that sense of validity in somebody's eyes. But it was also satisfying that feeling of inadequacy and not facing myself. And, at this point, I simply say, when it comes to politics, politics is politics. Sometimes it's a pile of tricks, right? Pile of tricks. Sometimes it is what it is, but it doesn't affect my life when I make choices for myself. People love to talk about how much they hate a certain place or whatever. You have the right to leave. You have the right to move. You have the right to, to be about your business, if you truly believe what you believe. But again, for most of us, it's just we want to feed and perpetuate that thing that we've been feeding all our lives. And so, yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I believe there's only one way out. And it's not being radicalized on any side. It's to think for ourselves. That's really it. It's really that simple. Just think for yourself. Don't let Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, don't let me do it for you. God forbid that, right? Don't let anybody else do your thinking for you. No side is going to have the answers that your spirit or your soul or your essence, your core has. Only you got those answers, and you need to dive deep and allow yourself to connect to who you are and create the life of your dreams, like create the life that you love. When you are creating a life and living a life that you actually love, you won't even have a desire to swing left, swing right, swing low, sweet cherry. Like, you ain't going to have any of those desires. You're not going to want to fight people. You're going to want your peace more than anything else, because that now becomes your proposal. When you know how powerful you are, you won't choose to stay in this place of resentment, bitterness, and anger and frustration and, and fear. Instead, you're going to choose your greatest good. So that's what I wish for you. Cheers.
Fell in love with the moonlight. I fell in love with the sunshine. Fell in love with the light. Fell in love with the night. I fell in love with the full moon. Fell in love with the night. I used to be afraid of the dark, a place unknown like a heart in their heart. I used to see my life in the bar. Now the kids unchained, every shackle is lost. 2 steps in the moonlight, 2 steps in the daytime. You just know when it feel right. You got a feeling the time's not. See you through those shades that I just threw on. Through my lenses, you just can't do no wrong. I fell in love with myself again. I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking.